And the topic today are liberal Democrats selecting the nominees of the Republican Party. We're going to start off by talking about the big picture. The big picture involves our Constitution, that we have a Bill of Rights that was added to that Constitution, the first 10 amendments, and the lawsuit centers on the First Amendment in the Bill of Rights. The First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. I pause here because some of you may say, well, we've all seen this before. But what I like to do is to point out that we often remember that we have certain religious rights in the Constitution, and we have certain speech rights in the Constitution. But we often forget that we have the right to assemble together. Does everybody see that? Our founding fathers believed that the right to assemble together, like we're doing here tonight, was so important that it needed to go into the Constitution. I want you to just think about that for a second. Your right to assemble together was so important that they put it in the Constitution right next to your right to worship and your right to speech. Why? Well, that's because the Founding Fathers and the people who crafted the Constitution and the Bill of Rights saw that one of the ways that tyrants control people is to prohibit people from assembling. I remember growing up, I'm old enough to have become politically aware when the Soviet Empire still existed. And I remember in high school learning that in Russia, you could not have 3 or more people meeting together in one location. It's because the Soviet Empire understood that when people get together, change is often a result. And do we not see that throughout our history, right? One man or woman will often do nothing in isolation. 2 people will often do nothing in isolation. But can we not observe that you get 100 people together who make up their mind to do something, don't they usually follow through with it? For good or bad, for failure or success, they usually will follow through with it. So what we have here in the First Amendment is your freedom of speech, which I think we all intuitively understand, and your freedom to assemble. And those merge into what we call the freedom of association. In the First Amendment, there's no words that say you have a freedom of association. But lawyers and courts, we have developed this doctrine that when you develop your speech, when you merge your speech and your assembly together, we shorten it to call the freedom of association. And what the freedom of association is that private organizations, note it doesn't say the government, private organizations have the right to exclude so that they can convey a clear message. You see how that merger occurs. Private organizations, that's your assembly, have the right to exclude so that they can convey a clear message. And it's easier to think about these things in real life cases involving the freedom of association. So about 25 years ago, this was in the news with the Boston St. Patrick's Day Parade, a Boston private military organization wants to hold a parade. It is the St. Patrick's Day Parade, all right? And we always look for a state law that is limiting people's freedoms, right? The state of Massachusetts has a law that says you cannot exclude people based on their sexual orientation. A homosexual group wants to march in the parade, and the military organization says, no, that doesn't send the signal that we want. That case goes all the way to the Supreme Court, because remember, you now have a conflict with the state law limiting people's constitutional rights, and the Supreme Court said that the military organization does not have to allow homosexuals to march in the parade, because if homosexuals were to march in the parade, it would change the message of the group. Does everybody see that? It changes the message that the group wants to convey. The other cases that we have, the next case that came up is the Boy Scouts, and this was a case out of New Jersey where, you know, the Boy Scouts do not allow homosexuals to be in the leadership. A homosexual wanted to be a leader of the Boy Scouts. New Jersey law says you can't discriminate against a person due to their sexual orientation. The Boy Scouts say no. That case goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says that the Boy Scouts have a constitutional right to the freedom of association, and so they can exclude homosexuals so they can convey a clear message about their morals. The next big case that came down also involved the Boy Scouts. It was a case out of California. California has a law. Again, this is important. It's always, the state has a law, right? The state has a law. California has a law that says you can't discriminate against any person based on their religious beliefs. The Boy Scout pledge requires you to say, it's for those of you who have been in Boy Scouts, you've heard it 100 times. The Boy Scout pledge has an affirmation in the belief of a God. This person said they didn't want to do it, and the Boy Scout said, well, you can't be a Boy Scout then. The case goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. The Boy Scouts won because, again, they have an associational right to exclude atheists so they can send a clear message. All right, so I think those three cases kind of help people understand how this works. All right? Well, the freedom of association becomes the freedom of political association because political organizations were seeing these Supreme Court cases come down in the last 25 years and say, well, gosh, you know, if you've got the right to exclude, that the Boy Scouts can exclude somebody, certainly a political party can exclude somebody, because political speech is probably the most important forms of speech that we have. And so therefore, certainly political parties can determine who their membership is so that they can send the message they want to send. All right? So that kind of brings us, the big picture, to the lawsuit. I always point out, this is not a registration by party lawsuit. You won't hear me say that unless I slip up. But it's a lawsuit for a closed primary, right? Because we don't want registration by party and then allowing everybody who's registered to vote in everybody's party's primary. That defeats the purpose. It is a lawsuit to try and close the primary so that only Republicans choose Republican nominees, only Democrats choose Democrat nominees, etc. By way of background, again, in the big picture, there's closed primaries. That's where Republicans pick Republicans. Semi-closed primaries, that's where Republicans and unaffiliated choose the Republican nominee. An open primary is what we have in South Carolina. That's where anybody can vote in anybody's primary. Blanket primaries are unconstitutional and not used anymore. That's where you can vote for the Republican for governor and the Democrat for lieutenant governor. And then the top two primary is a new thing. It's only three states now use it. California adopted it this year. That's where the top two vote getters vote. The top two vote getters in the primary advance to the November general election. So if the top two vote getters are both Democrats, on the general election ballot, it's only Democrats on the general election ballot. All right? We already talked about closed primaries and what they are. Closed primaries have been challenged and found to be unconstitutional. Now think about that. You just said, well, gosh, this guy's crazy. He wants a closed primary. Closed primaries have been found unconstitutional. Why? Because if the Republican Party, and that's what happened in this case, if the Republican Party wanted a semi-closed primary, the Supreme Court said political organizations get to pick who gets to choose their membership. If they want Democrats choosing their membership, is that their right? Absolutely. Absolutely. Right? Conversely, though, it goes true. If a political party wants to close their primary, they are allowed to close their primary. Okay? The Fourth Circuit, which is the district that we are in, has indicated that mandatory open primaries are unconstitutional. This is the Miller case and the second Miller case, 2006, 2007. These are essentially the cases that started the idea of the Greenville County Republican Party challenging the open primary systems, because in Miller versus Brown, 2007, arises out of Virginia, out of the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, again, which is what we're in. The state of Virginia was conducting an open primary. It allowed the incumbent to choose the method of nomination, whether to use the closed convention method or the open primary method. All the incumbents were choosing the open primary method, and so the 11th district, the 11th senatorial district in Virginia challenged the constitutionality of the law. The Fourth Circuit indicated that the open primary was per se unconstitutional if they are mandatory, i.e. there's a legal impediment. In that case, the court's ruling was because the incumbent got to choose the method of nomination, the party lost control over it, and therefore the open primary was unconstitutional since it was taken out of the hands of the party. They spent $412,000 in legal fees to challenge it. It took about 4 years to do it from beginning to end. Virginia now nominates by convention. The Virginia Republican Party no longer uses the primary system. They switched after this lawsuit to the convention system. And just for reference, they had 10,000 delegates show up at their state convention. Because why? Well, when you elect who your next governor, attorney general is at a convention, people are very motivated to start coming to the Republican Party meetings. All right. So this now gets into a lot of the litigation. I'm actually going to fly through a lot of this really quick. Under 71120, you will see that political parties can, with party rules, determine who is eligible to vote in the primary. I always pause at this moment because this is something most people don't know, have never considered, and we're not even thinking about. Okay? Under state law, the party can choose who can vote in the primary. So all the South Carolina Republican Party or the Greenville County Republican Party needs to do is to change the rules on who can vote. That'd be a lot simpler than a whole lot of litigation. You try and get it done, especially with the state party. It actually has to be a state party rule. Just to show you some of the problems that we've had with the lawsuit and why it's gone on for 4.5 years. In the original lawsuit, we cited the code section 7-9-40, which said that you must be a member of your political party club in order to vote in the primary. Well, the government was not following this law. The government was allowing anybody to vote in the Republican Party primaries, not just people who involved in the club. Clubs are people who showed up for precinct reorganization, in case you're wondering. People who show up for precinct registration that happens every 2 years. All right. Do you know, so we just simply said, we just want you to follow current law. Okay? Let me go back to that. It only took a few weeks for the legislature to strike Code Section 7-9-40 from the South Carolina Code. For those of you who are, pessimistic and don't believe anything ever can get passed by the legislature, Let me assure you that if the legislature wants to pass a bill, they can. Okay? They can do it in record time. As soon as this lawsuit was filed, there was an effort to remove this code section from the South Carolina Code, and it got done in a matter of weeks. All right? So the next time one of your legislators say, well, it just takes time, you just tell them, you know what, I've heard that when you're properly motivated, now this is the Republican legislature. I want you to think about this. The problem that we're having, the Republicans in the legislature are working double time to kill any effort to close the primaries. All right? Lindsey Graham, of course, was very critical of this lawsuit. It noted that the lawsuit was filed by me seeking to block Democrats from voting in the Republican Party elections, and Lindsey Graham was critical of it. And I said, I'd like to know, why does Senator Lindsey Graham want Democrats to be able to vote for him in the Republican primary? Okay? Now, Lindsey Graham's no fool. All right? You're going to see some absolute astonishing data here in a few minutes that shows how many Democrats are choosing the Republican Party leadership. And like anybody else who wants to win, you take the system as it is, and you do it to your advantage. Any person who wants to get elected in the Republican Party primary needs to have outreach to the Democrats. They need to get as many Democrats to vote, because that's how you win. That's what you're going to see. That's how you win the South Carolina Republican Party nomination. What I always describe conceptually, before we start moving on here, because I didn't point this out, and this is my analogy. I always analogize this to somebody who wants to be on the deacon board of the First Baptist Church of Greenville. Imagine a state law that said that when any church nominates their deacon board, elder board, whatever the appropriate board would be for the denomination, that anybody in any church could vote for the leadership of that church. Can we not agree? Can we not agree that if you wanted to run for the deacon board of the First Baptist Church, that you would need to get Lutherans to vote for you? And you would need to get Presbyterians and Catholics and Methodists to vote for you, right? So, if you're that young person wanting to be on the deacon board, are you going to run on a traditional Baptist message? Are you? No, because you can't win running on a traditional Baptist message. Okay? And can we all agree that over time, the people who sit on the deacon board of the First Baptist Church of Greenville would not be very Baptist? Can we not agree on that? Right? Okay? Now, why are we confused about why our Republican elected officials aren't very Republican? We shouldn't expect them to be. Okay? We shouldn't expect them to vote like Republicans. All right? So we have a complaint filed in June of 2010. I'm going to go really fast to get to some more interesting things. The Attorney General filed an answer. The Attorney General has been working overtime to stop this. Attorney General Alan Wilson, when you guys decide who to vote for on that, don't consider voting for him. I know you guys can't endorse anybody, but I'm not bound by your rules. About 40 individuals in various groups have intervened. Actually, it's 22 additional defendants have intervened in this. They allege that there will be racial polarization if the Republicans choose who the Republican nominees will be. The General Assembly, we already talked about this. They moved quickly to abolish the laws that would help us. We moved for summary judgment. The defendant interveners moved for summary judgment. Let's see here. The defendant interveners, and they're mainly Democrats and some other organizations again. Their main argument is that there would be racial polarization in South Carolina, and that there would be candidates hostile to their interests if elected. Well, I don't know, but isn't the whole purpose of having elections is to determine who's the winner and who's the loser? And can't we all agree that if you're on the losing end, the candidate who won is often hostile to your interests, right? I'm pro-life. And if the Democratic candidate wins, I don't expect that person to be pro-life. I don't, all right? All right, this is Attorney General Alan Wilson, his motion for summary judgment. This is Alan Wilson telling the court that we should lose without a trial, all right? Alan Wilson said that we'd have racial exclusion if Republicans were to choose Republican candidates. Racial exclusion, all right? That we'd return, we learned that in the days of the white primary, this is the Attorney General's office making their oral argument to the court. So they throw in things like white primaries. I mean, isn't that a loaded question? Isn't that a loaded response, right? The state interest, you see at the top it says state interest. This is straight from their brief. The government has to show what interest does it have in discriminating against you, okay? Because remember, the government can discriminate against you if it has enough of an interest, right? So the Attorney General said these are the interests that we have in keeping open primaries. The first one is my favorite, is that it prevents the Republican Party from having frivolous and fraudulent candidates.
Do they show any proof on this?
No. They just this is just them throwing it out. I mean, Alvin Green was running about this time, and I pointed out that he wasn't the Republican, and he was elected in an open primary. Greater choices, but I just want to pause here. This is our Republican Attorney General, right, opposing Republicans closing the primary, and his primary argument is that the Republicans will run frivolous and fraudulent candidates is the result of a closed primary, right? Greater choice. Well, I'm sorry, but there's sometimes you don't get to have a greater choice. Sometimes the purpose of a party or an organization is to reduce your choices. Isn't that right? Isn't that what it is? It's the right to exclude so you can send a message. Okay? Frivolous and fraudulent. This is another part of his brief. Idaho Republican Party. During the litigation, in our case, the Idaho Republican Party actually won a lawsuit in March of 2011 in which Idaho's open primary system was found unconstitutional by the courts. So I always point out there's hope, right?
The federal court?
The federal court of Idaho, in March 2011 found it unconstitutional. We have the first court orders came out in March for the nomination by convention issues. The judge has said that the Greenville County GOP has never attempted to vote in one in recent memory, and so we don't have any reason to complain. And for the primary, the court said they need evidence that Democrats are actually voting in the Republican primary because that was being denied. And the case was going to go to a full trial. Point out Chad Connolly runs for chairman. He runs on a platform opposing the efforts to close primaries. And I don't have time to go into the ridiculous things he puts in his letters. We filed motions to reconsider. I'm down to about 5 minutes. We're going to get to some of the meat here that I want to get to. The case is going to go to a full trial. It's the final ruling in July of 2011. We get a third judge. We get more legislation passed. We're going to spend a minute talking about legislation. People sometimes say, hey, well, why do we have to go through all this expensive litigation? The Republicans are in charge of the House and the Senate. Why don't we just get them to change the election laws? And I laugh because it gives me an opportunity to explain to you the real situation. Let's go back to that First Baptist Church of Greenville, right? If you went to the deacon board, who's now been elected in open primaries by Lutherans, Methodists, Catholics, and stuff like that, and you went to that deacon board, would you expect them to do something Baptist? Would you really do? No, you wouldn't, right? They didn't get elected by Baptists. Why would they act like Baptists? Right? Okay. So since Republicans aren't elected by Republicans, you wouldn't expect them to act like Republicans, okay? So in the Senate, in the last roughly 15 years, a bill has been introduced every year in the Senate to have registration by party and to close the primaries. For 15 years, there has not even been a subcommittee hearing on that bill. 15 years, the Republicans haven't even gotten around to having one hearing on that bill. In the House, for 15 years, somebody's been introducing the same bill. Last year, for the first time, it got a hearing. It got a subcommittee hearing. Now think about that. For 14 years, nothing. You get a subcommittee hearing. It gets voted out of the subcommittee hearing, which makes it go to the Judiciary Committee, right? Not that floor of the House, but just the Judiciary Committee, right? I helped write the legislation, all right? So I knew it word for word. What I thought was interesting is that the bill that got voted out of the subcommittee, when it got voted on at the committee level, they had changed 5 or 6 important words in it that completely gutted it. It's a classic example where if you change something from a no to a may, right? You with me? Or you change something from shall to shall not, right? And that actually happened in one. I hope we can all agree if you change something from shall to shall not, it completely changes the meaning. That can only happen is if the chairman and the powerful people on the committee tell the lawyers on the committee to rewrite the bill with no vote. Does everybody understand what's happening here? There's no vote to change the bill. It's simply arriving on the desks of the legislators in a modified form. And I, of course, said, wait a minute, this is absolutely terrible. It's actually worse than the situation that we're currently in, and it was. It's worse than the situation that we're currently in. Regardless, it doesn't make any difference, because for those of you who think there's a legislative solution, in the House Judiciary Committee there are 25 members, 15 of them are Republicans, 10 of them are Democrats. The total number of people who voted for the bill was 4. Do you think we have a problem? Okay? 4 out of 25. Are we even close to getting it out of the judiciary? No. Okay? No. All right. In our last couple of minutes, we're going to talk about the data. We've got about 3 minutes here. The data. This data comes from being a lawyer, litigation, and having the ability to pull in large amounts of information. You know, in a lawsuit, you can require other people to turn things over to you. So the State Election Commission had to turn over the names, dates of births, voter registration numbers, addresses of everybody who has voted in every single election in the last 12 years. All right? Because remember, the court said that she wanted proof that Democrats were actually voting in the Republican Party primaries. So I said, great, let's find out. Let's find out, okay? Now, to understand what happened is we paid $4,000. I paid $4,000 for a guy who's got a PhD in mathematics to write the computer code and to use the computer processing to compare literally millions of bits of data to find matches. What we eventually found out is that you have to use a voter registration number because that's a constant. When women marry, they get their names changed. People are moving addresses all the time. The only way to really track people is to use their voter registration numbers. During the lawsuit, the South Carolina State Election Commission changed everybody's voter registration number. Do you think that was an accident? A coincidence? I found it amazing. I filed a motion for sanctions and to compel, and we don't have time to get into all of this. But they literally changed everybody's voter registration number, so we had to reconvert everybody's voter registration number using a formula to change it to the old so that we could compare for more than a couple of years across data, okay? So what we do is we ask the computer to find everybody who votes here, their voter registration number, And how many voter registration numbers are identical over here? So, how many people voted for Barack Obama in 2008 presidential preference primary? We know that. Okay, the government tracks that, right? How many of those voter registration numbers appear in a few months later to choose who the Republican nominee is for governor? Right? Does everybody kind of understand big picture and why it takes a lot of technology and math and a huge amount of computer processing to do all this? But when we look at these numbers, you're going to understand these are all minimum numbers, and you need to understand why these are minimum numbers, and that is because we can only detect a change of position, right? If something remains the same, the computer doesn't detect it, you have to get a change of position. So what do I mean by that? It means if you have a Democrat who just turned 18 and is voting for the very first time, that's no change of position. We can't detect new people. We can't detect people moving from out of state who are Democrats into the system and voting in the Republican Party primary, because you see there's no change of position. They never voted before in South Carolina. I can't detect who they are, all right? People who are Democrats who vote consistently Republican, you see, is there a change of position there? No. So I can't detect that, okay? And let's say somebody who is a Democrat, but they're sick, or they have a loved one gets ill on election day and they just don't vote, but then 6 months later or a year later they vote in the Republican Party primary. You understand there's no change of position, so we can't detect that. All we can do is get the minimum number of Democrats who vote. All right? So let's look at some real-life examples. We've got about 4 of these, and then we're done. We got some solutions, and then we're done. The 2008 Democratic presidential preference primary. Obama, Clinton. Everybody with me? Obama, Clinton. Those are the people who got the votes, right? That was on January 26, 2008. There was a Republican special primary in House District 92, held on February 5th. How many days apart is that? 10. 22.38% of the people who voted in the Republican primary, minimum, voted in House District 92 to choose who that Republican nominee is. 22.38% minimum. So, put it this way, almost 25% of the people choosing the Republican nominee thought that Barack Obama was the best choice for America. All right? We have the 2010 Republican primary. There was 48,000 people who voted for Barack Obama, who voted in the Republican Party primary. Just so you have an idea of the perspective, all of the voters in Spartanburg combined is only 31,000 votes. Do you think there's a problem? Okay? There's more people voting for Barack Obama choosing the Republican gubernatorial nominee. No, the 2010 wasn't gubernatorial. Yeah, it was. Gubernatorial nominee. There's more people voting in that primary who voted for Barack Obama than all of the voters in Spartanburg County combined. Greenville, which produces the largest number of votes in the county, is only at 54,000. Or what I say is that Democrats are the second largest voting bloc in the Republican Party primary. That's the way it really sinks in. Obama voters, yes?
Refresh my mind, was there a primary on the Democrat ticket in 2010?
Yes, because, well, there was, because it would have been Vincent Shaheen and several other people running for governor. Okay? All right? 2010 presidential preference primary that we just had, just so you know, we look how many people who voted for Obama, 2010 presidential preference primary, make sure we're oriented. This is Newt Gingrich, Mitt Romney, Rick Santorum. You guys with me? And a whole slew of other people. I'd be here all day if we went through them all. Okay? How many people? 47,000 people who voted for Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton voted. And that, again, that exceeds all of the votes in Spartanburg County, it's Greenville County does outdo them. But to be honest with you, it doesn't please me that there's 1 out of 46 counties that can produce more votes than the Obama voters. Okay, it's staggering. I reviewed all of the candidate filing documents and compared that to who was voting the Republican Party primary. This took literally hundreds of hours, okay? 7 Democrats running for the nomination of the Democratic Party for the House of Representatives voted in the Republican Party primary. I think this is actually comical if it wasn't so sad. You need to understand, they're not voting for themselves. You understand this, right? These Democrats are not voting for themselves, okay? They're voting for who their Republican opponent is, all right?
Why is that?
Why is that? Because they can. Why? They probably have no primary opposition, these 7 people. They probably have no chance of losing their own primary. So they're going to go over and choose who the Republican is.
That they're going to run against.
That they're going to run against, and the county council member that they live in, and the city council member. You with me? Okay. Including current 2 sitting House members, Mitchell out of Spartanburg, and who was the other one? Boy, I would have known this the day before trial. And a guy on the coast. That's the real kicker. 2 guys who were current sitting House members voting. All right. The 2008 Democratic presidential preference primary, and then we have the 2008 Republican primary. They're only 5 months apart. 12% minimum chose the Republican nominees. We see in the city of Greenville, this chooses mayor of Greenville, water commissioner, Greenville City Council. We took a look. 22.3% minimum of the people who chose the Republican leadership for the city of Greenville voted for Barack Obama. Okay, minimum, including numerous officers of the Greenville County Democratic Party. That's all filed with the government, with the clerk of court. I took the time, lots of hours, to actually individually look at them. And, I mean, we've got we've got at least a dozen. You can put this in context. These are executive committee members of the Democratic Party are voting in the Republican Party primary, right? Yes.
Just one question. What percentage of the state, overall the people in the state, would you say are Democrats?
We don't know because the state of South Carolina does not require any registration. You could do a poll, you could do a general poll, and I don't want to misspeak, I just don't know any off the top of my head.
Okay. The reason I'm saying, would you agree or say that in general, state legislators are generally more responsive to their constituents if the constituents are asking them to vote in a certain way?
Oh, I would hope so, but often that doesn't happen. Yeah.
Okay. The reason I say that is that if there was a way, and I'm probably naive here, to take this case to the people like they're doing here now with the Tea Party, that may be the biggest challenge. If the people got behind it, then maybe they could put some heat on the legislatures to close the primary. What's your opinion of that?
Well, you got to remember that goes back to the slide. There's 25 people on the House Judiciary Committee.
Right.
You only have 4 votes.
That's
So-
the legislators, but I'm saying
Yeah.
if the people, not the legislators get behind it, I see your point. If the people of South Carolina came to realize what you're saying is true, and roughly maybe 25% of the people voting in Republican primaries are not Republicans, and they put heat on their legislators to change the system, would that also work? Do you think it would have a reasonable chance of working?
I think the answer to that is no,
Okay.
because you don't want to risk the wrath of the Democrats not voting for you. You have to remember, in politics, it's all about who comes out with the most votes on the day of election, right? So if you were to alienate Democrats, if you're a Republican, let's put it this way, if you're running for the Republican nomination, if you alienate Democrats, it makes it difficult for you to win the nomination. Because so many of these races are won by, I mean, how many times do we see races won by 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 percentage points, right? Well, if you alienate the Democrats, you're not going to win, okay? It's the reason why Lindsey Graham, you will see Lindsey Graham in this upcoming primary will have, and there's news reports about this, I'm just not making this up, there's news reports about what a good job Lindsey Graham is doing getting Democrats mobilized to come out to vote, okay? It changes people's speech. We haven't talked about this, and I guess we're in our question and answer time, stuff like that. Question and answer time. You got to remember the insidiousness of this system is it causes the politicians to change their speech. Because if you're a person who's running for office, you tend to want to win. That's why you're running for office. If you use words out of your mouth that alienate the Democrats, you intuitively understand you will not get the nomination. And so the speech patterns are changed. We actually had an expert from North Greenville University who is an expert, has a PhD in communications, who was lined up to testify at the trial about how candidates' speaking patterns and words change. There's actually been a lot of scientific research on that in open primaries. Yes?
Well, so if Democrats can vote in a Republican primary, Republicans can vote in a Democratic primary.
Unless they're on the same day.
I mean, Rush Limbaugh had a big thing with that a couple of years ago, you know.
Yeah, and,
So,
and
you know.
kind of my question is where does that really get us? Because then the difference, you can't get differences between Republicans and Democrats. We're going to finish this up. The case was dismissed on the first day of trial because the state Republican Party pulled out of the lawsuit 2 months before the trial. Chad Connolly filed a stipulation of dismissal on his last day in office. There was no vote of the executive committee for him to do that. It just literally just, they dismissed, the state party dismissed it. Solutions in our last minute, okay? You can have victory with the lawsuit, all right? You can nominate candidates at a county convention. This is the last slide. Nominate candidates at a county convention in June. Only Republican delegates then can vote for the Republicans. That's a closed primary systems. You do not certify the results of the open primary in June as a protest vote, or you do not certify candidates for the open primary in April. That's actually occurring on April 7th, especially if they have not voted to close the primaries. Essentially what you have to do is you have to take a position statement that says, look, until you close the primaries, we're not going to run any candidates in the primary, and that has the effect of causing everybody to run at a convention.